you convinced that every scientific mystery will at some point in the future be solved?
No, I'm not, and I think it's an intriguing possibility that maybe there are some mysteries that will never be solved. However, I think the right attitude to them is to say this is a challenge, and that even if we fear that some of them may never be solved, we're going to go on trying our damnedest to solve them.
So the difference, though, between that idea and the idea of a person of faith who says it's a mystery and I don't need to solve it,
Yes.
is what you're saying here is there's a mystery, there's a truth out there somewhere about the mystery, but we may never know it. But we know there's a truth?
Well, we may never know it. It may not even be an answerable question. But I think that the right constructive attitude is to try. What I'm criticizing here is the attitude that says, I love mystery. I want there to be mystery. You're spoiling it for us by working on solving the mystery. You're a killjoy. Scientists are not killjoy. Scientists are not killjoys. They are working on solving mysteries because they're even more wonderful when you discover the answer.
But at the bottom of that, I don't really see a huge difference. Yes, I know scientists are seeking the truth, but at some point there are scientists who would say this may be an unsolvable mystery. And don't they have to admit there may not be a truth at the bottom of that mystery?
I think the operative word is may. I don't think that's a reason to give up. I think it's still a reason to soldier on and try your hardest to solve it.
Online here from Joel in Iowa City, when you run into the unexplainable in science, where do you go? Do you think our brains are capable of understanding all things true?
Well, that's the same question as we've just been discussing. And once again, I think perhaps you could call it a matter of faith. It's not a matter of faith that we will solve everything, but it's a matter of faith that it's worth the effort, that we should try. And so far, we've done pretty well, I have to say. I mean, when you think about modern science as compared to 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, let alone to the Greeks, we're doing pretty well as a species.
What's the greatest mystery that remains unsolved in your mind?
Human consciousness, the subjective feelings that we have, the thing that makes me, me, and you, and I can never really get inside you, and you can never really get inside me. That may be an insoluble mystery.
But you believe there's a truth somewhere at the bottom of that.
I believe it's worth working on.
Do you think neuroscience will help to begin to solve that, or is that not the direction to go to find that?
I think that is the direction to go. I think that if mysteries of that kind are ever going to be solved, it will be a combination of neuroscience and probably computer science, interestingly enough.
Why?
Well, because do you mean why computer science?
Why, yeah.
Oh, because computers are capable of feats of, we could at the moment call it kind of mimicry of mental events. It's not, probably isn't conscious, but it seems to me not unlikely that in the distant future we shall have man-made computers which are conscious in the same sense as you and I are conscious. And if that happens, that we presumably would have the solution on our hands.
So the more you believe, the more we know about the brain as well, the more we may understand about human consciousness.
Of course, yes.
To the phones to Jeff in St. Cloud. Hi, Jeff.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm good. Your question for Richard Dawkins.
Well, first of all, I just want to say to Dr. Dawkins that I appreciate your seeking truth and how important that is for all of us to do that. My question basically is that in a book I recently read, it's called The Case for a Creator by Lee Strobel. He interviews a lot of the leading investigators and cosmologists. And one of the cosmologists proposed that a lot of people are putting science as above all and the only thing that we can learn from. But what about things such as history that cannot be repeated through scientific method? And a lot of Christians, like myself, who do believe in the resurrection, the virgin birth, things like that, are basing our beliefs on historical evidence, not just on science. And how do those relate for you?
Well, I think you've raised the question of history, the fact that things only happen once, and so in a sense it's not like science. Historical events, particular events like the Battle of Hastings, just happened once, and we have to rely upon documentary evidence for them. In the case of the resurrection, the historical evidence is extraordinarily poor. And so, I mean, if the historical evidence were good, of course, it would be another matter. Even then, it would be a difficult one to demonstrate. But the historical evidence is very, very poor indeed, as virtually all ancient historians agree. The problem about history sometimes arises with my own field of evolution, where it all happened in the distant past and nobody was there to see it. And we have to rely upon the clues that remain in the world today, of which there are very many. So the mere fact that history lies in the past is not a reason to say that we can't study it.
You write about the gaps in evolution, in the God Delusion, in a chapter about that, and you say there's a worship of the gaps. This idea that because there are gaps in the transitions in evolution, that argues for some kind of a higher power who made the transition. Do I have that right?
Well, there is I mean, it's actually a phrase that theologians invented to criticize other theologians, the God of the gaps. The idea that if we find a place in science which science doesn't actually have the knowledge to fill in the gap, then there is a tendency to say, oh, well, God must have done it.
And your answer to that is?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be mine. That would be the answer of the theologians who coined the phrase, the God of the gaps. You then lay yourself open to the problem that as the gaps shrink, so God shrinks until there's nowhere for him to hide. And so sophisticated theologians don't go for the God of the gaps.
But would you say to the people that believe that today, we will find the answer to what was going on in the theory of evolution in those transitions?
Gaps in the fossil record are not a big mystery. I mean, fossils, there's no law that says that every animal that dies has to fossilize, and there are the vast majority of animals that have ever lived have never fossilized. For example, there's a whole phylum, that means a really major group of animals, the flatworms. Some of them very beautiful, some of them not, like tapeworms. Not a single flatworm fossil has ever been found, and yet this is a very, very large animal phylum. So if you were to rely upon gaps and said, oh, if there are no fossils, then these animals must have just suddenly bounced into existence. Well, obviously, even creationists don't say that. I mean, they presumably think that the flatworms go back to the day of creation, 4004 BC, whatever it is, and yet not a single fossil has ever been found during all the time when vertebrates were fossilizing, insects were fossilizing, snails were fossilizing, and so on. The flatworms didn't. The flatworms alone are enough to show that the mere fact that there's a gap in the fossil record proves absolutely nothing.
To the phones to Ramin in St. Paul. Hi, Ramin. Thanks for waiting.
Hello. I kind of have a comment and a question to Richard Dawkins. I should say, just give you a little bit background about myself. I'm a theoretical physicist who grew up in Iran in his teenage years, and I should say I am also sick of this nonsense called religion. So I really appreciate Richard Dawkins' effort carrying this flag in the best possible way. I am sure that he's I know that he's actually writing this book. He put his life in danger as a person who actually grew up in Iran. But my question to Richard Dawkins is that is saying atheist is kind of saying I know God doesn't exist, and is this seems to be as arrogant as the religious people who says I know God exists. So it's kind of goes against this scientific mentality that you have to always question.
Yes. I mean, thank you. You've heard the accusation.
Thank you, yes. First, I'm delighted to hear those sentiments expressed from somebody from Iran. It needs a lot more courage to say them in Iran than it does here. Now, the point about